She's proof not every branch of the family tree bears fruit, my father announced, and the air went brittle. Polite chuckles masked sharper smiles. Then, as I set down my trembling glass, he landed the deeper blow. By morning, the board he controlled would lock me out before I'd even begun. My pulse roared, until the crack of a cane split the room. Grandpa rose, eyes fierce, and placed a set of brass keys in my palm. 14 days. Full transparency. Lights blazing by midnight. He thought I'd fold. He forgot who taught me to build. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. My name is Eliza Keene, and I'm 35 years old. I spend my days running community pop-up markets in our small town of Mill Creek, where the scent of locally roasted coffee mingles with the early morning chatter of vendors. My father, Howard Keene, chairs the town's Arts Foundation board and has never approved of my small-time ventures, as he calls them. My grandfather Gerald, though, the one who built half this town with his own hands, he's always seen something in me that Dad missed. Every time we meet, Grandpa shares another weathered blueprint from the granary, his old arts hall, along with stories that feel like preparation for something bigger. My fingers still remember tracing those faded lines while Dad's criticism echoed through our too-quiet house. But let me start from the beginning. The polished brass handles of the Grand Hotel's banquet room felt cool against my palms as I pushed through the double doors. You know that moment when you're walking into a room full of relatives and your spine automatically straightens? That was me, armored in my best navy dress, the one that usually made me feel confident during vendor negotiations. The crystal chandeliers cast warm light across familiar faces. Second cousins, great aunts, business associates who might as well have been family. They were all here for Grandpa Gerald's golden anniversary celebration of his first major building project. My father, Howard, held court at the head table, his steel gray hair perfect as always, his suit probably worth more than my monthly market revenue. Remember those school presentations where your knees shook but you had to look composed? The walk to my assigned seat felt exactly like that. I caught Grandpa's eye as I passed. He winked, the laugh lines around his eyes deepening. That small gesture steadied me, like his hand on my shoulder used to do when I was small. The first round of toasts started light. Stories about Grandpa's early days, his vision for the town, the legacy he'd built. I sipped my wine slowly, letting the warmth in my chest build a buffer against whatever Dad might say when his turn came. You'd think at 35 I'd be immune to his disappointment, but some wounds never quite heal, do they? The table settings caught my eye. Perfectly aligned forks, knife edges all facing inward, just like Dad had drilled into me at childhood dinners. I could still hear his voice. Precision reflects character, Eliza. My finger traced the edge of my dessert spoon, remembering how many times he'd made me reset the table until every piece was exactly right. When Dad stood, crystal glass in hand, the room's murmur faded to attention. His presence commanded that effect, something I'd never quite managed to inherit. As we celebrate Father's achievements, he began, his voice carrying that practiced warmth he used at board meetings, I'm reminded of the importance of legacy. My stomach clenched. I knew that tone. Some of us, his gaze swept the room before landing on me, serve as object lessons in the weight of family responsibility. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. My own daughter, for instance. He paused, letting the spotlight settle heavily on my shoulders. Well, she's become quite the cautionary tale, hasn't she? The sound of forks freezing mid-bite echoed in the sudden silence. Heat crawled up my neck as dozens of eyes turned my way. That old childhood instinct kicked in, the urge to shrink, to disappear, to become as small as Dad's opinion of me. A water glass trembled slightly in my hand. I set it down, determined not to let him see it shake. But before I could push my chair back or find my voice, another sound cut through the tension, the solid thunk of a cane against hardwood floor. Grandpa rose slowly from his seat, his movements deliberate. You could have heard a napkin drop. My father's smirk faltered as Grandpa straightened to his full height, still impressive even in his 80s. Enough. Just one word, but it carried the weight of every beam and girder he'd ever raised. His eyes found mine across the table, bright with something I couldn't quite read. Not pity. Grandpa had never pitied anyone in his life. No, this was different. It looked almost like anticipation. The room held its breath. Even the servers paused along the walls, trays of dessert suspended mid-delivery. Grandpa's fingers tightened around his cane's polished handle as he surveyed the gathered faces. When he spoke again, his voice carried to every corner of the suddenly still room. I believe it's time we discuss the true meaning of legacy. Grandpa's voice filled the room with the same quiet authority that had raised buildings across our skyline. The granary was my first major project, he said, running his hand along his cane. Built it when most folks said downtown was dead. Prove them wrong then. Maybe it's time to prove them wrong again. I remembered summer afternoons spent exploring those halls with him, the smell of old wood and possibility still sharp in my memory. The place had been shuttered for years now, its marquee dark, its potential locked behind chain-link fences and city notices. The foundation board, Grandpa continued, nodding toward my father's end of the table, has expressed interest in acquiring the granary. I'm prepared to gift it, under specific conditions. He turned to face me directly. Aliza will have 14 days to reopen the building. The words hit like a thunderclap. Silverware clattered as people shifted in their seats. 14 days? The place had been closed for almost a decade. Full transparency on the books, Grandpa added, his voice steady. And the marquee lights must be on by midnight of Founders Day. Meet these conditions, and the granary transfers to Foundation ownership with Aliza holding operational authority. My father's careful composure cracked for just a moment, a slight tightening around his eyes that most people wouldn't notice. But I'd spent a lifetime studying those micro-expressions, measuring my worth in their subtle shifts. Father, Howard said, his tone carefully measured, perhaps we should discuss this privately. The board has procedures. The board, Grandpa cut in, will have full oversight, but Aliza gets temporary authority starting now. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a ring of keys, old brass ones that probably hadn't turned in years. Time to see what she's really made of. Have you ever felt the weight of your whole life suddenly compress into a single moment? Those keys might as well have been made of lead as Grandpa pressed them into my palm. His fingers closed over mine, warm and sure, and in his eyes I saw decades of quiet faith finally speaking out loud. Scattered applause broke out, genuine from some corners, merely polite from others. My father raised his glass in what looked like a gracious gesture, but his smile had all the warmth of a banker foreclosing on a dream. To new challenges, he said smoothly. May we all prove equal to them. Later that night, I spread the keys across my kitchen table, their brass surfaces catching the overhead light. Each one had a small tag with faded writing: main entry, east door, projection room. My fingers traced their worn edges, and I could almost hear the hum of possibilities, like the building itself was waiting to wake up. My phone buzzed just before dawn, jolting me from a fitful sleep. 3 messages, all marked urgent, all from friendly faces on the foundation's lower rungs. The board had called an emergency session, my father's specialty when he needed to act fast. I threw on clothes and grabbed my temporary key card. The modern security system had been added years ago before the closure. The sunrise painted the city in shades of promise as I parked in front of the granary's facade. Even neglected, the building had bones you couldn't ignore, with its Art Deco curves and proud marquee. My heels clicked across the empty sidewalk as I approached the main entrance. The keycard scanner glowed in the dim morning light. I held my breath and swiped. Red light. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. My phone vibrated with a new message, the board's official notification. All access temporarily suspended pending comprehensive review of operational proposal and security protocols. The building loomed above me, its windows like closed eyes, the entrance as impassive as my father's smile had been last night. I pressed my palm against the cool glass door, feeling the barrier between me and everything those keys promised. You know that moment when you realize the game was rigged before you even started playing? Standing there in the growing dawn, watching my keycard's rejection reflected in the window, I felt my father's first counter-move land with surgical precision. The keys in my bag suddenly felt like they belonged to a museum piece. Historic artifacts rendered obsolete by modern locks and corporate protocols. I stood there getting soaked, my hair plastering itself to my neck as the morning drizzle turned steadier. The security guard inside, probably newly instructed about my suspended status, pointedly avoided eye contact through the glass. Nothing quite says powerless like being locked out of your own supposed authority. You know that feeling when humiliation tries to chase you off stage? That's exactly what my father was counting on. But Grandpa hadn't raised a quitter, even if my father had spent decades trying to craft one. My fingers were numb from the cold as I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name that had become increasingly familiar over the last year of pop-up markets: Nina Valdez. She'd saved more than one event when ancient venue wiring threatened to kill our lighting, and she had a way of making impossible deadlines feel manageable. She picked up on the second ring. "Aliza, it's not even 7. Someone better be bleeding." The board locked me out. My voice cracked a little, and I heard rustling on her end as she sat up. "They suspended access pending review. I have 14 days to open this place, and I can't even get in the door." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "Your father works fast, I'll give him that." A baby fussed in the background. Her youngest was teething, and I heard her shushing softly before coming back. "Give me 20 minutes to drop Marco at my sister's. Then we'll talk strategy." "Nina, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling." The smile in her voice carried more warmth than I'd felt all morning. "Besides, you think I'm going to miss watching you take down that corporate boys' club? Not a chance." 2 hours later, I was holding onto a coffee cup like a life preserver while Nina sketched on the back of a receipt. Her bandana was slightly crooked from running here between jobs, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "So we can't get inside? Fine. Let's work outside the box. Literally." She wasn't alone. Word had spread through her network, and our table for two had become a war council of 5. There was Sandra from the lighting crew who'd done my holiday market, Maria, who specialized in pop-up staging, and Jen, whose food truck had saved more than one of my events when scheduled vendors bailed. "Sidewalks public property," Maria pointed out, spreading out a city planning map she'd somehow produced. "We can start building community support right there. Music, art displays, food, show them what they're missing." "I know at least 3 bands who'd play for exposure and coffee," Jen added, already typing on her phone. "Good ones too, not the kind that make you wish for earplugs." Nina's pencil flew across her makeshift blueprint. "We prep everything we can off-site. The second that door opens, and it will open, they can't keep you out forever without looking suspicious. We move fast. I'm talking military precision." I felt something building in my chest, something that pushed back against the morning's defeat. These women weren't offering empty sympathy. They were offering muscle, skill, and the kind of practical magic that comes from years of making things work with whatever you've got. "The press will eat this up," Sandra said, grinning. "David and Goliath, but make it local. You've got roots here, connections. Use them." My coffee had gone cold, forgotten as possibilities started crystallizing. We could build momentum outside while fighting the access battle. Show the community what the granary could be again. Make the board's obstruction look as petty as it was. But the clock in the corner of my phone screen kept ticking. 14 days minus 1 morning gone already. Every hour we spent planning was an hour not spent actually working. My chest tightened as I counted the days in my head again. Nina must have read something in my expression because she reached across the table and tapped my wrist. "Hey, one thing at a time. We've got this." My phone chose that moment to chirp with an email notification. The subject line made my stomach drop through the floor. "Urgent. Building code violation report filed. Immediate action required." I looked up at the circle of faces around me, these women who'd shown up with solutions while the board was still congratulating itself on creating problems. The email could wait 30 more seconds. "Okay," I said, straightening my shoulders. "Let's do this right. Tell me more about this military precision plan." I stared at my phone screen until the words blurred. The building inspector's email was diplomatic, but firm. All work suspended until the violation report could be investigated. My hands shook as I forwarded it to Nina. "Remember when you were a kid and time seemed to stretch like taffy? Those endless summer afternoons when the sun barely crept across the sky? Well, watching precious hours evaporate while bureaucracy ground its gears felt like exactly the opposite. Each tick of the clock was a hammer blow against our deadline. The rain hadn't let up since morning. I stood at my apartment window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass, watching droplets race down the pane. The same way my grandfather used to time us as kids, betting pennies on which raindrop would reach the bottom first. The memory made my throat tight. My phone buzzed. "Nina." "This is Bull," she said without preamble. "Anonymous complaint? Please. Your father's fingerprints are all over this. Doesn't matter who filed it." I rubbed my temples. "We're stuck either way." "No, we're not. We adapt." There was shuffling on her end, the sound of papers being moved. Look, we can't work inside? Fine. There's plenty we can do off-site. I've got space in my workshop. We'll refinish furniture there. Sandra's crew can prep the lighting rigs in their warehouse. The dance troupe can rehearse at the community center. I straightened up. You really think... I know. And here's what else we're gonna do. Sidewalk concerts. Right outside the granary. Keep the energy up. Remind people why they donated. Make it impossible to ignore what this place could be. The idea sparked something in my chest. The city can't stop music on public property. Exactly. And every person who stops to listen is another person invested in seeing those doors open. We worked the phones all afternoon. By sunset, we had a lineup of local musicians willing to play for coffee and the chance to be part of something bigger. Jen's food truck would provide refreshments. Maria knew someone with portable heaters for the chilly evenings. The first show was that weekend. I held my breath as the musicians set up, wondering if anyone would brave the crisp autumn air to listen. But they came. First just a few curious passers-by, then more. Soon the sidewalk was filled with people swaying to acoustic guitars, sharing hot chocolate, asking questions about the granary's future. I stood back, watching faces light up as stories circulated about what the hall used to mean to the town. An elderly couple remembered their first date at a dance there. A middle-aged woman recalled performing in her first piano recital on that stage. Each memory was another thread connecting past to possible future. Nina appeared at my elbow, grinning. Not bad for Plan B, huh? Not bad at all. I gestured to where Sandra's team was demonstrating lighting techniques with portable spots. Look at them go. We're building more than just buzz here. Nina nodded toward a cluster of donors I recognized, all nodding along to the music. We're showing them their faith wasn't misplaced. For just a moment, watching the impromptu community taking shape on that sidewalk, I felt invincible. Like maybe we could overcome anything my father threw at us through sheer determination and creativity. Then my phone rang. Marcy Klein's number lit up the screen, the journalist who'd been covering our progress for the regional paper. "Tell me you're sitting down," she said when I answered. "I'm not, but..." "Find a seat, now." Her voice had the kind of urgency that makes your skin prickle. "Someone just sent me screenshots. They're about to hit every news outlet in town, and Eliza..." She paused, and I could hear her shuffling papers. "You need to hear this before it breaks." I sank onto a nearby bench, the music suddenly distant and muffled, as Marcy began to explain exactly how my father planned to destroy everything we'd built, starting with our crowdfunding campaign. "Your father doctored screenshots of your crowdfunding transactions?" Marcy explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Made it look like you've been siphoning donations into a personal account. He's feeding it to every outlet in town." The music from the sidewalk concert suddenly felt like it was coming from underwater. "But that's not possible. Every transaction is documented, tracked." "I know. But by the time fact-checking catches up, the damage will be done. They're running it tonight." You know that moment when your stomach drops and your fingers go numb? When you can actually feel your world tilting sideways? Yeah, that. I watched a young couple drop money in a musician's guitar case, their faces bright with the kind of trust I was about to lose. How bad are the screenshots? Bad enough to look real to anyone who doesn't know better. Account numbers, dates, everything. He must have been planning this for weeks. Of course he had. While we'd been building something real out here on the sidewalk, he'd been crafting our destruction in some corner office. I could almost see his satisfied smirk as he hit send on those files. My phone pinged with the first notification, then another, and another. Remember those old movies where someone's reputation crashes in real time through newspaper headlines spinning past the screen? Social media is worse. So much worse. Every refresh brought new comments, each one a paper cut to the soul. What happened to the money? I knew this was too good to be true. My aunt donated her birthday money to this scam. 3 hours later, our crowdfunding platform sent the email I'd been dreading. Account temporarily suspended pending investigation. Just like that, our entire budget, frozen. Nina's garage became our crisis center that night. The whole crew showed up, gathering around workbenches cluttered with the pieces of our almost finished projects. Sandra perched on an overturned paint bucket, scrolling through local news sites. Maria paced between stacks of refinished chairs, making calls to vendors. The radio hummed softly in the background, playing the same songs we'd heard at the concert just hours ago. "We could release the original bank statements," Sandra suggested. but her voice lacked conviction. By the time we prove they're real, we'll have missed the deadline. I stared at the calendar Nina had tacked to her pegboard. The 14th day was circled in thick red marker, mocking us. 10 days left, and now we had nothing. Nina slammed a wrench onto her workbench, making us all jump. Okay, let's inventory what we've got. Materials already paid for? The lighting equipment's covered, Sandra said. And we own the tools now. Paint and supplies are stored at my place, Maria added. And the musicians are still with us, I said, checking my messages. They're calling it artistic protest now. But as we tallied our resources, the math was brutal. We needed industrial cleaning supplies, safety inspections, permit fees, utility deposits. The list went on, each item another brick in the wall between us and that deadline. I walked to the garage door, needing air. The night was clear now, stars sharp enough to cut. Somewhere across town, my father was probably pouring himself a celebratory drink, satisfied that he'd finally proven what he'd always claimed, that I wasn't fit to lead anything. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over my grandfather's number. Maybe it was time to admit defeat. Save everyone the trouble of watching me fail spectacularly in public. I started typing. I'm sorry, but don't you dare. Nina's voice behind me was steel wrapped in velvet. She must have followed me out. Look at the numbers, Nina. We can't. Numbers aren't everything. Your grandfather didn't give you this challenge because of numbers. No, I said, bitter now. He gave it to me because he didn't know my father would play this dirty. The calendar's red circle burned in my mind. Even if we somehow finished the work, found the money, beat the clock, lit those doors by midnight, would it matter? My father hadn't just attacked our project. He'd poisoned my name. Every achievement would now come with an asterisk, a whispered, but remember when. The phone felt heavy in my hand, the unfinished message to my grandfather glowing accusingly. Inside the garage, I could hear the crew still working, still believing. Their loyalty should have felt like a comfort. Instead, it felt like one more thing I was about to let down. The rain started around midnight. You know that kind of rain that feels like it's trying to wash away more than just dirt? Yeah, that kind. I lay in bed listening to it drum against the windows, each drop another second ticking away on our impossible deadline. Ever notice how problems that seem manageable in daylight grow fangs in the dark? I kept seeing those comments scrolling past my eyes, the accusations, the disappointment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's satisfied smile, like he'd known all along this would happen. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent except for occasional notifications of more donors pulling out. I'd turned off the sound, but the screen kept lighting up the ceiling like silent lightning. Each flash reminded me of how many people I was letting down. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and made coffee. Strong coffee, the kind that could probably strip paint. The kind Grandpa used to drink during long construction days. The smell filled my kitchen, bringing back memories of summer mornings when he'd let me tag along to job sites, teaching me how to read blueprints while the sun came up. You ever wish you could go back and tell your younger self what's coming? I sat there wondering what little me would think of all this. She'd probably be disappointed too. By dawn, I looked about as rough as I felt. Dark circles under my eyes matched the clouds outside, and my hair had that special kind of mess that comes from hours of tossing and turning. But I couldn't stay home. The walls were closing in, each tick of the clock another reminder of failure. I tried calling Grandpa 3 times on my way to the granary, straight to voicemail each time. His message played in that warm, gravelly voice of his. Leave a word, I'll call you back. Unless you're trying to sell me something, then don't bother. I've got enough stuff. Usually, that message made me smile. Not today. The granary's parking lot was empty when I pulled in, puddles reflecting a gray sky that matched my mood perfectly. I sat in my car, staring at the building through rain-streaked windows. All those dreams we'd had for this place, the music, the art shows, the community gatherings, they felt like smoke now, slipping through my fingers. My phone felt heavy as I pulled up my messages to Grandpa. The cursor blinked at me, waiting. What would I even say? Sorry I let you down? You picked the wrong person? Dad was right about me? The first draft was pathetic. I tried, but delete. I know you believed in me. Delete. Maybe it's better if... A knock on my window nearly sent me through the roof. I looked up to find Marcus, Grandpa's driver, standing there in the rain. He'd been driving for our family since I was a kid, but I'd never seen him look so serious. I rolled down the window. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" He held out something wrapped in an old cloth. "Your grandfather asked me to bring this to you. Said you'd know when to open it." The thing he handed me was a dented tin box, the kind that used to hold Christmas cookies when I was little. It felt cold and surprisingly heavy for its size. "When did he give you this?" Marcus adjusted his cap, raindrops running down his face. "A while back. Made me promise to wait until—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Until it got impossible." My throat tightened. "Did he say anything else?" "Just that you'd know the right moment." He touched the brim of his cap and turned to go, then stopped. "Miss Eliza, he believes in you, always has." I watched him drive away through the blur of rain and maybe a few tears. The box sat in my passenger seat like a time bomb or a lifeline. I wasn't sure which. Back home, I placed it on my kitchen table, right next to that morning's untouched coffee. My fingers traced the dents in the old tin, wondering what kind of message from the past waited inside. Whatever Grandpa had left in there, it would either save us or confirm what everyone else seemed to believe, that I wasn't cut out for this. The box didn't make a sound when I shook it gently. No rattle of keys or rustle of paper, just solid weight and decades of family history in dented metal. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. That familiar scent of old metal and paper wafted up. You know that smell, like memories stored away too long? Inside, everything was organized with Grandpa's typical precision: leather-bound ledgers, manila envelopes thick with documents, and a blue folder marked with today's date. I picked up the first ledger, its pages dog-eared and annotated in Grandpa's careful handwriting. Numbers jumped out at me. Large transfers, questionable allocations, all leading to something called Mountain Vista Development. My stomach clenched as I recognized my father's pet project, that exclusive resort he'd been dropping hints about at board meetings. "Oh my God," I whispered, flipping through more pages. The pattern was clear as day. Foundation money flowing out through a maze of shell companies, all leading back to Dad's private venture. Grandpa had traced every penny, every shell game, every lie. The next envelope held notarized statements from former board members who'd been quietly pushed out after asking too many questions. Their testimonies formed a damning picture of systematic intimidation and cover-ups. I remembered those resignations, how Dad had spun them as natural turnover. My coffee sat forgotten, growing cold as I spread everything across the table. The morning light caught the official seal on a legal document tucked into that blue folder, a safe harbor clause filed with the State Oversight Board. The language was crystal clear. Any whistleblower exposing foundation misuse would be protected from retaliation. Grandpa hadn't just given me evidence. He'd built me a bulletproof shelter to stand in while I used it. Remember how I told you about those blueprints he used to share? This was his master plan all along. Every document, every receipt, every testimony. They were the building materials. And that safe harbor clause? That was the foundation he'd laid before anyone knew we'd need it. I sat back in my chair, letting it all sink in. The apartment felt different somehow. Warmer, charged with possibility. My father's smirk from that dinner flashed through my mind, but this time it didn't sting. I had more than just accusations now. I had proof. My phone buzzed. Another critical message about the frozen crowdfunding account. I almost laughed. Dad's leaked screenshots seemed pretty small compared to years of systematic fraud. I checked the time. 2:47 p.m. The work crew would be finishing their off-site tasks soon. My fingers moved across the phone screen, typing a message to Nina. "Emergency meeting at the granary, 7 p.m. Bring everyone." Her reply was immediate. "Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I wrote back. "Much better." I started gathering the documents, organizing them the way Grandpa had. Each piece told part of the story, and together they sang like a choir. My father had spent years building his house of cards, never knowing Grandpa was quietly documenting every move. You know what's funny? Just yesterday, I'd been ready to quit. Ready to prove Dad right about me being a failure. Now I had to resist the urge to drive straight to his office and watch his face as his carefully constructed world crumbled. But Grandpa hadn't built his legacy on rushed revenge, and I wouldn't either. This needed to be handled right. Methodically, legally, publicly. The 14-day deadline wasn't just about saving the granary anymore. It was about saving everything it stood for. I made one more call, to that journalist friend who'd warned me about Dad's smear campaign. "Hey," I said when she picked up. "Remember how you said you owed me a favor after that Artisan Fair coverage? I've got something you might want to see." My hands were steady now as I closed the tin box. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and patches of blue were breaking through the clouds. Timing, Grandpa always said, was everything in construction. Looks like it ran in the family. The streetlights cast long shadows across the granary's parking lot as our crew gathered that evening. Nina had brought coffee in a massive thermos, the good stuff from that little place on Cedar Street that somehow made everything feel more manageable. The steam curled up into the cool night air while I spread Grandpa's documents across the hood of my car. "Holy shit," Nina whispered, scanning the ledgers. "Your father really thought he'd get away with this." "He almost did." I traced my finger along a particularly damning transfer record. But Grandpa saw it coming. Must have been documenting everything for months, maybe years. The familiar scent of coffee mixed with autumn air brought back memories of late nights at the pop-up markets, when Nina and I would plan layouts by streetlight. But tonight felt heavier, more permanent. This wasn't about arranging vendor stalls anymore. This was about exposing years of systematic fraud. "We need to call an emergency board meeting," I said, shuffling the papers back into order. "Open to the public, press invited, live streamed for anyone who can't attend." Nina's expression tightened. "That's going to bring every kind of heat down on us fast. Your father's not going to just sit there while you expose him." "I know." My voice was steadier than I expected. But we're past the point where staying quiet helps anyone. The foundation was supposed to serve this community, not fund private resorts. One by one, the crew members nodded. We'd all seen too many community spaces disappear, too many good ideas die because the right people couldn't access resources. The granary wasn't just about meeting Grandpa's challenge anymore. It was about breaking a pattern. First light tomorrow, I decided. I'll send the meeting notice. We'll need the main hall ready, cameras set up, everything documented. We worked late into the night, preparing the space as best we could from the outside. The red tag still hung on the door like a threat, but we focused on what we could control. Every piece of evidence was organized, every document copied and backed up. I even recorded a video statement, just in case something went wrong. Back home, I barely slept. At dawn, I sent the meeting notice to the board members, CCing local press and community leaders. The response was immediate. My inbox flooded with RSVPs, questions, and a few thinly veiled warnings from Dad's allies. You know that feeling when you're standing at the edge of something big and your body knows it before your mind catches up? My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I made my morning coffee. Then my phone rang. The board's legal counsel, a name I recognized from countless foundation letterheads. "Ms. Keene," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "I need to advise you about potential complications." My stomach dropped. What complications? Given the nature of these allegations, there's a strong possibility the court will want to review everything before any public disclosure. That process could take weeks, maybe months. I gripped the phone tighter, staring at the calendar where I'd circled our deadline in red. We had days, not months. "We can't wait that long," I said. "The challenge deadline would likely be suspended pending investigation," he finished smoothly. "It's the prudent approach." Prudent. The word felt like ash in my mouth. Through my kitchen window, I could see the granary's roof, still waiting for the repairs we hadn't been allowed to start. Prudent would kill us as surely as any direct attack. "Thank you for the warning," I said, and hung up. Nina and the crew were already gathering outside the hall when I arrived, their faces questioning. I told them about the call, watching their expressions shift from concern to determination. "So what's the play?" Nina asked, adjusting her bandana. I looked at our half-finished work, the stage we'd been preparing off-site, the lighting rigs waiting to be hung, the boxes of sound equipment, then at the faces of these women who'd chosen to stand with me, knowing the risks. "We finish before anyone can stop us," I said. "All of it. The repairs, the books, the truth. Everything goes public at once. No more waiting for permission." The morning sun hadn't quite burned through the fog when I uploaded everything to a public cloud drive. Every document from Grandpa's tin box, every suspicious transaction, every piece of evidence laid bare for anyone to see. My finger hovered over the share button for just a moment. Funny how such a small action could change so many lives. Remember those moments in old westerns where someone throws open the saloon doors and the piano stops dead? That's what happened when our evidence hit social media. For about 30 seconds, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. Then everything exploded. "Inspector Morris just confirmed," Nina announced, bursting into our makeshift command center. Really just her garage with laptops everywhere. "He's reviewing the files now and wants to do the final walkthrough tonight." I caught myself gripping the edge of the table. "Tonight? That's cutting it close. You got a better timeline?" She raised an eyebrow. "Besides, transparency was part of the deal, right? What's more transparent than letting him audit everything while we work?" The memory of my father's smirk at that anniversary dinner flashed through my mind. He'd thought he had all the cards. Now the whole town was shuffling the deck. Local news vans started appearing around the granary by noon. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from reporters, board members, and townspeople offering support. Even my old high school math teacher sent a note saying she'd always known I had executive potential. Amazing how a little sunlight changes people's perspective. "Aliza!" One of our crew members, she'd been painting trim all morning, waved from across the hall. "Channel 4 wants to do a live segment at 6. Should we—" "No cameras inside until we pass inspection," I called back. The last thing we needed was footage of half-finished work going viral. "Tell them they can film from the sidewalk." We worked like we were possessed. Nina's crew strung lights with military precision, while volunteers organized receipts and cross-referenced every expense entry. The smell of fresh paint mixed with coffee and determination. You know that energy when you're so focused even your mistakes seem to work out? That's how it felt. "Remember my first pop-up?" I asked Nina as we checked the stage lights. "When that storm knocked out power and we used car headlights to keep the market open?" She laughed. "Yeah, and now look at us, taking down corruption with paperwork and paint swatches." By evening, the granary hummed with possibility. The refinished floors gleamed under temporary work lights. Every seat was in place, every financial record organized. Inspector Morris moved through the space methodically, making notes and asking surprisingly few questions. Maybe because our books were cleaner than Sunday school. "Looking good, ladies," he said, checking off another item. "Just need to test the permanent lighting system and—" The room plunged into darkness. You could hear tools clatter as people froze in place. Emergency lights kicked in, casting weird shadows across walls we'd spent days perfecting. Nina's flashlight beam cut through the gloom as she rushed to the electrical panel. "Main breaker's dead," she called out, "and the backup system's not engaging." My chest tightened. We had less than 3 hours until the midnight deadline, and a dark arts hall wasn't exactly what Grandpa had specified. Through the windows, I could see my father's car pulling away from the power station down the street. Of course, he couldn't stop the inspection, but he could still try to fail us on a technicality. "How long to fix it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Nina shook her head. "Even if we could get parts this late, we'd need permits to work on the main line. They know that." The inspector cleared his throat. "Ms. Keene, I'm afraid without proper lighting. Just—" I held up a hand, closing my eyes. Think. There had to be a way. "Give me 5 minutes." In the dim emergency lighting, faces turned toward me. Crew members, volunteers, even a few curious locals who'd slipped in to watch the inspection. All these people who'd believed in this project, in me. I wasn't about to let a blown breaker be our final act. Nina's phone lit up her face as she scrolled through contacts. "I might have an idea," she said, "but you're going to have to trust me." In the dark, every sound amplified. Footsteps echoed off walls we'd just painted. Nervous whispers bounced between shadows, and somewhere, a phone's flashlight beam swept across the ceiling like a lost spotlight searching for its stage. "Nobody panic," I said, though my own heart was doing its best jazz solo. "We've got emergency lights and we've got—" I checked my watch in the dim glow. 58 minutes until midnight. Remember when I said earlier that time feels different when you're racing against it? Well, those 58 minutes might as well have been 58 seconds. The inspector stood near the entrance, his clipboard casting a longer shadow than it should have, while volunteers huddled in small groups, their phones creating islands of light throughout the hall. Nina's footsteps pounded down the front steps. I'd know that determined stride anywhere. Through the windows, I watched her pace the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing with her free hand the way she did when she was problem-solving out loud. A few minutes later, She disappeared around the corner toward the parking lot. Ms. Keene. The inspector's voice made me jump. I understand this is unfortunate timing, but without proper illumination. Just a few more minutes. I cut in, probably too sharply. But seriously? After everything we'd overcome, the board's lockout, the red tag, the frozen funds, were we really going to fail because of a blown fuse? The sound hit us before we saw anything. An engine's rumble, growing louder, then the distinct screech of tires taking a corner too fast. Headlights swept across the windows, and I heard what had to be Nina shouting directions to someone. Coming through! The front doors burst open, flooding the entrance with stark white light. Nina and two others, I recognized them from her regular crew, were wrestling what looked like a generator the size of a small car up the steps. Its wheels clattered and jumped over each ridge in the concrete. Little help here, Nina called out, and suddenly everyone was moving. Flashlight beams converged on the entrance as volunteers rushed to hold doors and guide the generator inside. The thing must have weighed a ton, but Nina navigated it like she was parallel parking a bicycle. Where'd you even get this? I asked as they positioned it near the main electrical panel. Remember Jorge from the spring market? The one with the food truck? Nina was already uncoiling thick cables, her hands sure in the dim light. He keeps this beauty for outdoor events. Said we could borrow it if we fuel up his truck for a week. I made a mental note to fuel his truck for a month. The next few minutes were a blur of technical terms I barely understood, and the kind of focused teamwork you usually only see in heist movies. Nina's crew worked with the precision of a pit stop team, connecting cables and checking readings while the rest of us held our breath. Okay, Nina said finally, wiping her hands on her bandana. Moment of truth. She flipped a switch. Nothing happened. Then, a hum. Low at first, like the building was clearing its throat. The marquee outside flickered once, twice, and blazed to life with a warm golden glow that spilled through the windows and across our upturned faces. One by one, the interior lights followed suit. First the stage spots, then the main overheads, until the granary shone exactly as we'd imagined it. The freshly painted walls gleamed. The polished floors reflected every bulb like stars brought indoors. Even the inspector's clipboard looked friendlier in the proper light. Well, Nina said, grinning as she dusted off her hands, guess we better finish setting up. Clock's still ticking. She was right. The generator's steady purr reminded us that we weren't done yet. Volunteers scattered to their stations, straightening chairs and making final adjustments. The inspector resumed his rounds, this time with proper lighting to check every detail. I caught Nina's arm as she passed. I don't know how to save it. She squeezed my hand. Just promise me prime vendor space at the next market. Through the windows, I could see people gathering on the sidewalk, drawn by the suddenly illuminated building. Some had phones out, probably already spreading the word that the granary was coming back to life despite everything, or maybe because of everything, we'd faced. 42 minutes until midnight. Time to make them count. Let's start with the electrical upgrades, I said, leading the inspector toward the main panel. Ever tried giving a building tour while your heart's doing sprints? The generator's steady hum felt like a countdown clock, each vibration reminding me how close we were cutting this. Nina fell in step beside us, rattling off specifications and safety measures with the confidence of someone who could wire a spacecraft in her sleep. The inspector's pen scratched against his clipboard, his expression neutral as Switzerland. Remember those end-of-semester exams where you knew every answer but still couldn't breathe until you saw the grade? This felt worse. All permits are in order, I continued, pulling out a folder thick with documents. And here's our complete financial record. Every receipt, every donation, every hour of labor logged and compensated. The papers trembled slightly in my hands. I forced them steady. The inspector paused at the stage, testing the new safety rails we'd installed. And the structural reinforcements? Right here. I spread out Grandpa's original blueprints alongside our renovation plans. We matched the original support beam configuration exactly, just with updated materials. Behind us, volunteers moved with quiet urgency, arranging the last rows of chairs with the precision of museum curators. The sound system hummed through its final check, each speaker coming to life with a soft pop that made me jump every time. 10 minutes to midnight. The inspector circled back to the entrance, reviewing his notes. Each flip of paper felt like sandpaper on my nerves. I caught Nina's eye. She gave me a tiny nod that somehow contained all the reassurance in the world. Ms. Keene, the inspector's voice drew me back. Your emergency lighting systems? I pointed to the clearly marked exits, their signs glowing steadily. Battery backup units, tested hourly for the past 3 days. Runtime reports are in the safety log. 7 minutes. He walked the perimeter one last time, measuring distances between exits, checking fire extinguisher dates. The clock on the wall ticked with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. 5 minutes. The inspector stepped onto the stage, his shoes echoing in the expectant quiet. The crew froze, tools half lowered, breath held. He adjusted his glasses, reviewed his checklist one final time, and reached for his stamp. The sound of approval hitting paper was barely audible, but it might as well have been a thunderclap. Someone whooped, probably Nina, and suddenly the hall erupted in cheers. Hugs broke out everywhere, paint-stained shirts pressed against work clothes in celebration. The tension of 2 weeks dissolved into pure relief. I allowed myself one deep breath, the first that had reached my lungs properly in days. We'd done it. The granary was officially, legally, dramatically back in business. My phone buzzed in my pocket, then buzzed again, and again. The first notification was from the local paper's website. Breaking, Arts Foundation Board removes Howard Keene amid financial misconduct allegations. The second was a press release. Emergency board session votes to refer evidence of misappropriated funds to state regulators. The third was a text from a reporter I knew. Your father just left the foundation building. No comment to press. Want to talk? More notifications poured in, each one adding detail to the avalanche. The board hadn't just removed him. They'd stripped him of all authority and initiated a full forensic audit. The evidence Grandpa had collected, combined with our public disclosure, had triggered multiple regulatory investigations. I leaned against the freshly painted wall, letting its coolness steady me. Around me, the celebration continued, but I felt strangely distant from it, watching my father's carefully constructed empire crumble in real time on my phone screen. Nina appeared at my elbow, took one look at my face, and glanced at the headlines now flooding social media. She squeezed my shoulder. You okay? I think so. I locked my phone, silencing the flood of notifications. It's just, I wanted to stop him from sabotaging the granary. I didn't expect to expose years of financial misconduct and trigger his complete professional collapse? Nina raised an eyebrow. Karma's funny that way. You know that moment when you're hosting a party and everything's finally perfect? The music hits just right, conversation flows like wine, and even the lighting seems to understand its job. This was better. I stood in the granary's entrance, surrounded by the warm buzz of victory and vindication. The generator's hum had faded to background music, keeping our lights bright and steady. People streamed through the doors, artists, vendors from my pop-ups, neighbors who'd watched the drama unfold, reporters still scribbling in notepads. Their voices echoed off the restored walls, filling the space with exactly the kind of life Grandpa had always envisioned. Nina appeared beside me, wiping paint from her hands. Got a minute? There's something you should see. She led me to a small workshop table they'd set up near the entrance. On it sat Grandpa's brass carpenter's square, freshly polished. The metal caught the light, throwing warm reflections across the wall. Found this in the tin box, she said. Thought it deserved a special spot. I picked it up, feeling its familiar weight. How many times had I watched Grandpa use this, checking corners and measuring trust? The brass was worn smooth where his hands had gripped it for decades. A lifetime of building, of making things right, lived in its angles. Perfect timing, I said. Help me with this? We positioned it carefully beside the main entrance, high enough to catch everyone's eye. Nina held it steady while I marked mounting points. The drill's whir drew curious glances, but I didn't mind the audience. This moment deserved witnesses. As I secured the final screw, something made me look up. Across the street, partially hidden in shadow, stood my father. Even at this distance, I recognized his stance. Shoulders rigid, hands clasped behind his back, like he was facing a firing squad. The streetlight caught his face just enough to show its harsh lines, its complete lack of warmth. For a moment, our eyes met. I expected to feel anger, or perhaps satisfaction at his downfall. Instead, I felt nothing. He had no power here anymore. His weapons, the board, the press, the frozen accounts, lay broken at his feet. The mighty Howard Keene, reduced to lurking in shadows while the daughter he'd dismissed celebrated his exposure. I could almost hear his voice from that dinner. The family's cautionary tale. The memory should have stung, but it felt distant now, like a story that happened to someone else. Movement caught my eye. People gathering near the entrance, drawn by the mounting ceremony. Their faces showed genuine curiosity, not the polite mask of social obligation I'd grown up watching at my father's events. These were my people, the ones who'd shown up, pitched in, believed in something bigger than status. The moment needed words. Not his kind of words, designed to wound and control, but something true. Something built from experience rather than inherited from power. I turned to face the crowd, letting my voice carry. Respect isn't inherited, it's built in public, brick by brick. The phrase hung in the air, simple and solid as the carpenter's square above us. When I glanced back across the street, my father had vanished. But the hall, Grandpa's hall, my hall now, blazed with light and possibility. Music spilled onto the sidewalk, drawing more people in. The marquee cast its glow like a welcome mat made of light. "Nice line," Nina said, bumping my shoulder. "Very quotable." I laughed. "Think the papers will run it?" "Oh yeah, right next to the headlines about your father's retirement and the ongoing investigation." She grinned. "Speaking of which, want to see the latest updates?" "Not tonight." I gestured at the growing crowd, the restored space, the brass square catching light like a beacon. Tonight's about building something new. The buzz of conversations filled the hall, punctuated by laughter and the clink of glasses. Every now and then, someone would point to a restored detail or admire a particularly clever repair. Each comment felt like confirmation. We'd done more than meet a deadline. We'd brought something valuable back to life. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. And tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.